Life, as I thought, was going according to plan. I was 20 when I met my future husband. At the time, I was living in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, attending college, and working part-time at a bookstore near campus. I never considered myself the type of girl who dreamed of getting married or having serious relationships in my youth. I had my own plans for the future. Get my degree, find a job that would provide stability and the ability to help my parents, and still have time for the things I loved. But everything changed when he entered my life. We met by complete chance. I was working the shift when he walked into the store to buy a gift for his sister. He spent a long time browsing the shelves, going through book after book, until I couldn't stand it anymore and approached to offer help. The first thing I noticed was his smile. It was so genuine, it could melt the ice on the coldest day. Then, I noticed the way he spoke. He was confident, but not arrogant, calm, but with an inner energy that immediately caught my attention. After a few minutes of conversation, I realized I had a hard time tearing myself away from his gaze. He bought the book I recommended, and as he was leaving, he said, "If my sister doesn't like this gift, I'll come back and demand compensation, a cup of coffee with you." It was so unexpected that I just laughed and didn't respond. But he came back a week later. He said the book was a hit, but he still wanted his compensation. And even though I usually didn't agree to such proposals, this time, it felt different. We met at a small cafe nearby. The conversation flowed easily, as if we had known each other for years. He told me he worked in the tech industry, had recently moved to our town, and was still getting used to the new place. I shared my plans for school and my career. Time flew by unnoticed. That day, we parted ways, but just a few days later, he called again and invited me to dinner. That's how our relationship began. It developed quickly, but it never felt rushed. He knew how to listen, was attentive to details, and showed care. It was something new for me, and I allowed myself to relax, to stop controlling everything. We started spending almost all our free time together. Walks in the park, weekend trips to the coast, evenings at home watching movies. He became part of my life, just as I became a part of his. A year after we met, he proposed. It was unexpected, yet at the same time, it felt completely natural. We were sitting in the backyard of his house, drinking wine and gazing at the stars. Suddenly, he stood up, took a small box from his pocket, and looking straight into my eyes, asked if I wanted to spend my life with him. It was the happiest moment of my life. Without hesitation, I said, yes. Our marriage started with a small ceremony. We decided not to throw a big celebration, inviting only our closest family and friends. After the wedding, life fell into a comfortable rhythm. We both worked, made plans for the future, and enjoyed each other's company. It seemed like we had everything, perfectly balanced. We often talked about how we'd travel, try new hobbies, and explore the world together. One day, we even joked that we would still be just as happy in 50 years, sitting on the porch of our house in our old age. The question of children didn't come up right away. At first, we both agreed we wanted to live for ourselves. We needed time to get to know each other better, to strengthen our relationship. Whenever a family member or friend asked about our plans for children, we smiled and said, "Not yet." It was our mutual decision, and it suited us both. However, after a few years, I began to notice that my husband was talking more and more about his colleagues' families, about how their kids were growing up, and sharing funny stories. He became more thoughtful whenever we saw children in the street or at friends' houses. I could sense that something in him was changing. but I didn't pay much attention to it until one day he outright said that he would like us to have a child. I was caught off guard. It was a serious conversation, and I remember feeling lost in the moment. I spent a long time thinking about his words. I loved him, trusted him. He was not only my husband, but my best friend. If he truly wanted to become a father, could I really say no? He was so certain, so full of hope and desire, that in the end, I agreed. It wasn't an easy decision, but I was sure we would manage. He promised to be by my side, to help with everything, to support me. When I found out I was pregnant, he was over the moon. His reaction reassured me that I had made the right decision. He showered me with care, genuinely thrilled with every piece of news about our future child. Together, we prepared the house for the baby's arrival, choosing a crib and coming up with a name. This period was one of the brightest in my life. I saw how much he had changed, how badly he wanted to be part of our new life. But sometimes, things are too good to be true. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't foresee just how suddenly everything would change. When I was pregnant, I felt like we had finally found the stability we had always dreamed of. Every morning began with his caring words, and he would ask how I felt and what he could do to help. He was there, even when I told him I could manage on my own. His support during this time meant everything to me. He didn't just actively participate in preparing for the baby's arrival, he was genuinely concerned about me. He read books on parenting, watched documentaries, even consulted with friends who had already become parents. When our son was born, his joy was genuine. I saw the way he held our baby for the first time, and in his eyes I saw a mix of happiness, pride, and responsibility. In that moment, I was sure everything would be fine, that he would not just be a good father, but the best. He was by my side during those first days, helping at night, cooking meals, doing everything he could so that I could rest. We worked as a team. It was difficult, but we managed. However, as the weeks turned into months, I began to notice the first signs of him pulling away. At first, it was barely noticeable. He started staying a little longer at work than usual, became less involved in taking care of the baby. If he had previously gotten up at night to attend to the baby, now I did it alone. When I asked him about it, he answered with the usual phrases about being busy and tired. I believed him. How could I not believe him? He had always been so reliable, but then the changes became more apparent. He began spending less time at home. If we had once shared dinners together, talking about everything under the sun, now he ate silently or retreated to another room, supposedly to check something for work. I tried not to pay attention to it, thinking it was just an adaptation to our new life. We had just become parents. This must be difficult for anyone. One night, while I was feeding our son, I noticed his phone flashing with a new message. Usually, I never looked at his phone. We always had a relationship based on trust. But that moment, something inside me made me pick it up. I saw a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name. The message was short. "Good night, my dear." My heart started pounding faster. I put the phone back on the table, unsure of what to think. Maybe it was just a colleague, I told myself. Maybe I was just tired and seeing things that weren't there. But that moment stayed with me. Each day, I began to notice more things that I hadn't paid attention to before. He started taking more care with his appearance, spending more time in front of the mirror. He bought new clothes that he never would have considered before. He was more focused on his looks than ever. When I tried to talk to him, he would respond irritably, telling me I was imagining things. I tried to believe him, but inside, a feeling grew that he was hiding something from me. As time went on, our relationship began to crumble. If we used to talk for hours about everything, now our conversations were limited to brief exchanges about the baby. If I asked about his day, his answers were short, without details. When I asked why he had become so distant, he either stayed silent or said I was being too pushy. I felt like I was losing him, but I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, when he came home later than usual, I couldn't take it anymore and asked outright, "Is there someone else?" He stared at me for so long that I thought he would simply reject the accusation, but instead, he sighed and said, "Yes." My heart seemed to stop. I couldn't believe my ears. He admitted that there was another woman, but said he loved us, me and our son, and that he wasn't planning to leave the family. His words seemed so absurd that I didn't immediately understand what he meant. He tried to explain that things were complicated, that he was confused, that he didn't want to lose the child. I didn't know what to say. I was torn apart with pain. I looked at him, and I couldn't understand how someone who had sworn eternal love to me could do this. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and just sat there holding our son. I felt empty. For the next few days, we barely spoke. He avoided me, I avoided him. Every time I saw him, a wave of anger and resentment washed over me. But at the same time, I couldn't just walk away. We had a son, and for his sake, I decided to try. I told myself it was just a temporary fling, that he would come back to us if I showed him how much I loved him. I tried to be patient, to ignore his coldness. I thought it would work, but I was wrong. After his confession, our life seemed to freeze. We continued to live under the same roof, but it wasn't a family anymore. Every morning started with tense silence. Every evening ended with him retreating to another room or staying late at work. I watched him, trying to understand what had changed, when things had gone wrong. Was it when I started paying less attention to him because of the baby? Or had he just grown tired of our relationship? I searched for answers, but I only became more confused. I tried to repair our relationship. I tried to be patient, not showing my pain. I continued to make his favorite meals, suggested we spend more time together, hinted that we could start over. But it was as if he had detached himself from me. He responded to my attempts as if he were fulfilling an obligation. Sometimes he agreed to spend time with our son, but even that seemed forced. He used to eagerly take the baby in his arms, play with him, laugh. Now he only did it when I asked. All his attention seemed to be elsewhere, on something else. I tried to convince myself that this was temporary. After all, he had said that he didn't want to leave the family. But with each passing day, I felt my patience wearing thin. The pain I had once suppressed began to spill out. More and more, I found myself crying at night when he was either asleep or hadn't come home yet. It wasn't just the fear of losing him. It was the pain of knowing I had already lost him, even though he still lived under the same roof with me. A few weeks after his confession, I suggested that we live separately. It was probably the hardest decision I had ever made, but I felt like we both needed space to figure ourselves out. I hoped that the separation would help him realize what he truly wanted, and that it would give me the strength to get through all of this. He didn't argue. He packed his things and left. He said it was only temporary, that he just needed time to sort out his feelings. But even in that moment, I knew his heart already belonged to someone else. When he left, I was left alone with our son. It was both terrifying and a relief. Terrifying because I had no idea what the future held for us. A relief because I no longer had to face his empty gaze and feel rejected. But at the same time, my mind was filled with questions. What will happen to us? Will he come back? Can I forgive him if he does? Despite everything, I kept hoping. I thought he would realize that his family was more important than some fleeting affair. I believed that he would remember how happy we had been, how we had eagerly awaited the birth of our son, how we had made plans for the future. That hope was my only anchor. I told myself that if I just waited, if I just gave him time, everything would return to how it had been before. But he didn't come back. He called to ask about our son, and sometimes he came by to see him, but these visits were rare and brief. Each time he came, I saw how he tried to avoid looking at me. He spoke about the baby, about how our son was growing, but not a word about us. That silence was louder to me than any words. It spoke volumes. It told me that his decision had already been made, even if he didn't want to admit it to himself. I found out that he was still seeing that woman. They worked together, and he spent more time with her every day than with me and our son. I tried not to think about it, to focus on myself and the baby, but it was impossible. Every morning, I woke up thinking about where he was and what he was doing. Every night, I went to bed wondering why I wasn't enough for him. When he finally returned home 2 months later, I wanted to believe that things would be different. He said that his relationship with her was over, that he had realized that family was more important. He promised he wouldn't lie anymore, that he was ready to work on our marriage. He even said this to my parents, who had seen how much I was suffering. They supported me and asked me to give him another chance, for the sake of our son. And I did. I allowed him to return, despite the pain, despite the betrayal. I wanted to believe that he had changed. I wanted our son to grow up in a complete family. But deep down, I knew nothing would change. And I was right. His return didn't bring relief. It only deepened my pain. I found out that he had come back not because he wanted to be with us, but because his mistress had refused to leave her family. She was married with children, and she wasn't going to destroy her life for him. He came back to me because I was the convenient alternative, and that knowledge destroyed the last remnants of hope I had. After his return, I felt like our family was nothing but an illusion. He came back, but not to me, not to our son. He came back to what was comfortable for him. I became his shelter, a way for him to save face, a way to live without being judged. But this wasn't living. It was a role he played to check the box. Every day, I felt myself drifting further away from him. I tried to stay calm, for the sake of the child, for my own sake. But inside, a void grew. His indifference, his lies, it was as if they were draining the life out of me. I saw how he avoided my gaze, how his mind was always somewhere else. His phone, which he had always left open, was now locked. When I asked about his work, he answered briefly, even irritably. I was no longer a part of his life, even though we still shared a roof. I tried for so long to convince myself that this was just temporary, that he still loved us, that he just needed time. But the truth was, he didn't love us. He loved the woman who had become everything I once was to him, and I couldn't bear to live with that any longer. One night, when he was already asleep, I saw his phone light up with a new message. My heart stopped, but I took the phone in my hands. The message was from her. It wasn't anything special, just a short phrase. I miss you. But it was enough to destroy everything that was left between us. I knew that he would never let her go, and I didn't want to be part of this lie anymore. The next morning, I made the decision to file for divorce. It was simultaneously the hardest and most liberating moment of my life. I told him calmly, without hysteria. He tried to convince me to change my mind, telling me that everything would change, that he would break up with her, but that I just needed to wait. I didn't believe him anymore. His words sounded like empty promises he was making to himself, not to me. I set him one final condition. If he wanted to save our family, he had to quit his job where she worked and cut all ties with her. He said it was impossible, that finding a job like his would be hard, that I was on maternity leave and wouldn't be able to support myself and the child. But at that moment, I stopped listening. My decision was final. My parents supported me. They saw how much I was suffering and knew I deserved more. I filed for divorce and began packing my things. Yes, I was scared. Yes, I still loved him, the man he used to be. But I could no longer live in this illusion. I understood that he had chosen his path, and I was choosing mine. When he realized I was serious, he tried again to stop me. He said he needed time to sort everything out, that he wanted to be with us. But his actions spoke louder than words. He didn't quit his job. He didn't stop communicating with her. And I knew it would never end. He couldn't make a choice. So I made it for him. Now I am alone with my son. Life is still difficult, but I feel like I can breathe more freely. I no longer wait for him to come home, no longer hope he'll change. I know I deserve more. I'm doing everything I can to raise my son to be happy, to show him a strong and confident mother who knows how to set boundaries and respect herself. Yes, it still hurts. Love doesn't disappear instantly. It fades slowly, leaving scars. But these scars remind me that I endured, that I can move forward. I no longer wait for a miracle. I'm building my life on my own. And though this isn't the path I imagined, it's my path.